And I'll be quick, so welcome. I also want to extend our appreciation for Greater Mankato Growth and Andy for the work in putting this series together, of which this is one. I think it's important. I'm also very appreciative of the work that our student body has put in to trying to make sure that we get out the vote for this election. It's a consequential election, as all are. This one just has a feel of being especially consequential. And our student body president and vice president are here somewhere. I don't know where the vice president went. Oh, she has a paper due. That's important because, however, I think our students have been very motivated to ensure that our students are registered, ready to vote. And this type of opportunity is one that I think really helps us get a better sense of the issues and where candidates stand and provide opportunities for us to ask questions. So thank you for being here, and thank you to GMG for hosting.
All right. Thank you to President Inch for that welcome. Thank you all for being here as well. My name is Andy Wilkie. I serve as the Director of Business Development and Public Affairs at Greater Mankato Growth. Can everybody hear me? Everybody good? Great, thank you. I'm one of the moderators this evening. I'm joined by Ashley Hanley of KTOE and Radio Mankato as co-moderator. I want to thank Ashley and KTOE and Radio Mankato for your partnership with this forum. For those who don't know, Greater Mankato Growth is the Chamber of Commerce and Economic Development organization for the Greater Mankato region. Our membership includes more than 900 businesses, nonprofits, and public partners. We operate Visit Mankato, City Center Partnership, and Green Seam. Our goal tonight is simple. We want to give voters a chance to hear from candidates directly on issues that impact the business and economic vitality of our region. I want to thank you all for attending tonight. I want to thank Minnesota State University Mankato for hosting us. And lastly, our good friends at KTV and Bethany Lutheran College. This event is being recorded and will be available online at greatermankatoelections.com. Before I address some housekeeping items, I want to let you know that Greater Mankato Growth is hosting a total of 7 candidate forums this year. On Thursday, we will host our congressional forum for the 1st Congressional District of Minnesota at 6 p.m. at South Central College. You can get more information on all past and upcoming forums, along with the voter toolkit and candidate bios at greatermankatoelections.com. Great. First, I'd like to set out a few expectations of our audience to help us present an engaging and civil dialogue this evening. We have more questions than we have time for, so we ask that you help us by making the most of our time by holding your applause until the end of the forum, and that there be no shouting or heckling, especially of the moderators. Thank you for those of you still laughing at that one. This evening's format is as follows. Each candidate will be asked a question and given roughly 3 minutes to answer the question. As moderators, we will be flexible with this time limit. This evening, we're more interested in engaging in robust discussion and getting these candidates' thoughts on issues, so it may take longer in some instances. Any follow-up questions or discussion will be at the discretion of the moderators. These questions have been put together by me and Ashley, along with input from the Greater Mankato Growth Public Affairs Committee. They have not been shared with the candidates. Lastly, some of you have submitted questions at the entrance. Inez, in the back, will bring those to me later on, and we will ask some of those as time allows. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce the candidates for this evening's forum, Luke Frederick and Dar Vosberg. Please join me in thanking them for being here this evening. Now let's get to work. Now we begin with our first question. Ashley.
All right. Good evening, everybody. So our first question is, tell us who you are and why you are running for the Minnesota House of Representatives. And let's start alphabetical order. Yes.
Luke is first.
So first of all, my name is Luke Frederick, and I just want to thank Ashley and Andy and MSU for hosting us here. It is very exciting to be able to do this type of thing in person this year versus 2 years ago. And so it's just, the whole experience is a lot of fun. Part of the reason that I'm running for office and asking for people's support is because my whole life I've been focused on service. I was never a person that was always in like every sport that there was. I found different ways to do volunteer work, whether that was Boy Scouts or Civil Air Patrol, or dedicating a year of my life into AmeriCorps. That is a full-time volunteer gig, doing random projects, whether it's disaster relief or going into the woods in Vermont and building a summer camp for underprivileged kids. I've wanted to be of service. After I came back from AmeriCorps, I got a job over at the state hospital, where I continued to work, or began to work with the mental health population, and got involved with my labor union. And in my labor union, I again looked for opportunities to be able to serve and support my coworkers, the peers that I was working with, and the people that we served there. And that was kind of my foray into politics, because I was seeing that the people served there, both the people committed there and the people that worked there, were getting hurt, and I thought we could do better. So I got involved with politics. I ended up going up to the Capitol and doing anything I could to create a better working environment and a better place for people to call home. And so the last 2 years, I've kind of taken that same stance of how can I make my community and state a better place. My biggest focus has been on mental health, on expanding access to mental health, getting more pathways to become a mental health provider. We know that 50% of the state's population is up in the 4-county metro, yet they have 80% of the providers, leaving us in greater Minnesota in desperate need for more mental health care and more mental health providers. And so that's been a big focus of mine, along with working with the community and city leaders and asking them, how can we work in conjunction? Because it is my belief if we work together, we're all going to be that much more productive. And I hope that they can count me for the last 2 years as a good partner, and continue to be a good partner for the next 2 years should I get elected.
And Dar.
Okay. Can I get this a little down more? So I'm Dar Vosberg. Again, thank you for hosting this, and for the audience too. I did not grow up in Mankato. I have lived in the Mankato area for over 33 years. I was born in Minneapolis. I am the oldest of 4 children, and my mom and dad have been married for 61 years last week. So I graduated from Minnetonka High School, and I decided to go to Gustavus for 2 years. I ended up transferring over to Mankato State. I still call it Mankato State. It's hard to change. And I actually did not graduate because I had some health problems, and I had a little bit of an issue with a pharmaceutical drug that I was taking, so that caused me to quit school. So I ended up staying in the Mankato area. I worked at a whole bunch of different restaurants and bars. And then my parents asked me to, my parents have been entrepreneurs their whole lives, other than maybe when I was a little baby. Always had some type of business. And my parents had just started a dry cleaning business up in the Twin Cities, in the western suburbs. And my dad lost his manager, and I had become unemployed with a restaurant in town that was not doing well. So my dad asked me to come help him for 2 weeks. So I went up to the cities to help my father for 2 weeks, which turned into 9 years, 9 years later. And I had been dating someone from Mankato for 11 years. And then after 9 years of being up in the Twin Cities, we decided to get married. And we had a crossroads. Where are we going to live? So I love the Twin Cities, but I also loved Mankato. So we decided for me to move back down here. That was natural. So I decided to get my real estate license. And I have been selling real estate in Mankato for over 25 years. I also manage, as I said, my dad's a serial entrepreneur. He owns a storage business in Mankato, and I have been running that since 2009. And I also have a tenant that's in my real estate office that is in natural health. She has a PhD in naturopathy, and she owns a wellness company, and she wanted to start a thermography business. So her and I, she is her brainchild, but we started that together, and I love natural health. That's a passion of mine, learning how the body can heal naturally thermography is radiation-free breast scanning. So I have that business, and then I also sell some wellness products on the side. So not that I have anything else to do. Why did I decide to run? I have absolutely had no intention of ever getting into politics whatsoever. The only experience I had with it was in 6th grade. I ran for school treasurer, and I lost to Chet Snyder. 40 years later, I can still remember his name. So the reason I got involved in politics is it started with COVID, and some of the stuff that was happening with COVID. As I said, my parents are business owners. They've owned dry cleaners. During the shutdowns, they were considered essential. However, their customers were not working. They were all Zooming from home, and they did not need their clothes cleaned, so their business just dropped down over 80%. So that hurt them. They also had a location on West Lake Street. Well, we all know what happened on Lake Street, and they during the riots, we had a store that was in the middle of a purchase agreement. And then what they ended up having to do is close that store. It was not doing well. It wasn't doing well. That's why he wanted to sell it to begin with, but it definitely wasn't doing well after the riots. And he ended up closing that location, and just this April, they were able to find a subleaser. So he had to pay rent for that whole time. So just a lot of the little things. My grandmother in the nursing home, I never got to see her. She passed away last year, and I never got to see her all during COVID, so I never got to see her before she died. So those were just some of the things. I was kind of, just a little frustrated with how our state's been run and things that have been happening. So I started attending some events, and I started getting involved in some of the local stuff. And I just one day I just said maybe I should run and try to make a difference, because you start complaining about how things are done. And you got, at one point you have to say, well, I can't keep complaining about how things are run. I've got to try to make a difference. So my goal is to make a difference. As a business owner, I'm hoping to bring common sense to the Capitol, and, our state needs to be run like a business. There needs to be accountability, even more so after all the stuff that had happened with the fraud, the COVID fraud. So that's just some of the reasons. There's lots of reasons. That's just my story. And then the story of everyone else in the state, all the people that have lost their businesses and what happened, and just, a lot of things haven't been rebuilt after the riot. So that was just the impetus of me wanting to step up and try to do something. As I said, I've never been involved in politics, so this is all new to me. So I apologize if the answers aren't the best, but that's just me.
Thank you, Dar. All right, Dar, we're going to stick with you. This is a question for me here. So what top 3 issues will you personally work to address at the legislature? Top 3 issues.
Well, some of the things that I feel need to be addressed is, well, number one, the bonding bill didn't get done last year, and there's some crucial things that need to happen. And Minnesota, our area has the wastewater treatment system that is failing, and I feel that needs to be we can't wait another 2 years. The costs are astronomical for what it's going to cost, because so every year we wait is just going to be even more. The surplus, what I would like to see happen is that a lot of the money gets returned to the taxpayers, and also have some permanent tax cuts. So, and then another issue, healthcare. Healthcare is just, how do we fix it? I don't have an answer, but how do we fix it? I personally, my husband is old enough to be on Medicare, and I am, as an independent business owner, I can't afford to get my regular health insurance, so I'm actually doing like a cost sharing program, and that works for me. But because I usually go to holistic treatments, so that works for me. But healthcare, I don't know how to fix it. So those are some of the things that I would like to address.
Thank you, Luke. Top 3 issues.
So I alluded to one of my top 3 issues in my opening statement, talking about mental health. It is something that when I'm outdoor knocking, it is an issue regardless of the person that I'm talking to, where they land on the political spectrum. It is something that everybody recognizes is a need. The work that I've done on that in the legislature has been bipartisan, quite often unanimous votes on the legislation that I carry, because everyone, again, recognizes the need to expand mental health services. And so I would be committed to, again, working on that as much as I can to have more professionals in the field, more pathways to become professionals, whether that is grant programs, we say like tuition, programs to help people pay back tuition, but we also know that upfront costs can be a barrier to some people getting into the field. So having money upfront to support that as well, along with ways to support people when they are trying to go after licensure and needing to pay for that clinical time. So that would be one of the biggest ones. Another top issue for me would be democracy in general. And I say that not to be facetious, but I look at around the state and the nation, and there are people who say that, elections didn't happen or what be you. And I go up and I want to strengthen our election system. I want to make sure that Minnesota can remain having the highest voter participation in the nation. I think that's something we can all be very, very proud of. And we need to make sure that we are reinforcing that. I think we should not be afraid when people are voting and not making it more challenging for people to participate in voting. And I think those are things that we hear, that there are forces within the state that they want to change that. There has not been a single case of voter fraud that has impacted the outcome of any election anywhere in the nation at any level. There's not one. And so to create a boogeyman to basically enact policies that make it harder for people to participate in democracy is a farce. And so we need to make sure that we continue to be a state where we have high voter participation, and we need people elected who will carry on those values to the Capitol. I think the third piece that would be important to me as well would be an economic message. That's probably one of the most common things I also hear at the doors, and that would be looking at the surplus and what we can do for the surplus. Which is going to be part tax cuts that I would want to have be focused on kitchen table issues that are going to be benefiting the majority of Minnesotans, not the wealthiest among us. And then find ways that we can make investments into the state. Because I know that there's lots of different conversations about what we can do with that. But if we can take some of that surplus, I was the chief author in the House carrying the bonding bill that would put money towards Mankato's wastewater treatment facility. And when we can take that money and invest it in things like that, what it does is it keeps everybody's utility rates low. So it may not be as upfront and direct as here's a check in the mail, but it makes it so there's more money that stays in everybody's pocketbooks over the long term. Because once those rates go up, I have a hard time thinking they're going to go back down. And so making those investments with the money from the surplus, I think, is a wise economic long-term decision that needs to happen sooner than later.
Thank you, Luke.
So we're going to kind of stick with that surplus and budget talks here, but now we're going to go a little more specific. So the main task of the legislature in the 2023 session will be to pass the next state budget. In 2021, the legislature passed its largest biennial budget ever of $52 billion. Current estimates show a surplus of more than $12 billion for just this year and more than $15 billion in the next biennium. What will be your budget priorities for the next biennium? I think we're back to Luke starting first.
I think investments in again, mental health, not to be just repeating there, but I also think investments in our education system. The conservative-leaning State Chamber of Commerce has said that every dollar that we invest in closing the education gap in Minnesota, we will get back about tenfold. And so I think taking some of that surplus money and investing it in our education system will be, again, a long-term investment that we will all benefit from. So I think that's going to be critically important. I know that serving on the Transportation Committee, I was hearing from all over the state about the needs to invest in roads and bridges and making sure that they stay safe to drive on. We need to continue to invest in our data infrastructure, continue blanketing the state in fiber optic cable or something so that way everyone has access to high quality, high speed internet. Because the more that we do that, I think the future is going to be, whether it is education that we've seen in the last couple of years or healthcare or any other reason, we are all going to be more dependent on access to that. And so making those investments now, I'm proud to say that I signed on to legislation each year of this last term that would put money towards broadband access across Minnesota. I think that that's desperately needed. The bonding committee, when they came to town here at this university, I sat with them because I was advocating for Mankato's wastewater treatment facility. But the city of Eagle Lake showed up and said that, they need money to help with their water treatment facilities. The city of Skyline is putting up a water tower right now, and they need support in their water treatment. And the city of Waseca came over and said they also need money for their water treatment facility. And that's just, the local communities here. It's pretty easy to say we can look at almost every single community across the state and say they could benefit from some of this surplus money in ways that would directly impact Minnesotans for decades forward. And I think that we would be wise to take the surplus. We made an agreement that we would put some as a reserve, just kind of build a safety net. I think that is healthy. I think that is a good thing. But I also think that if we can make these investments across the state, that will be the most beneficial long term.
Thank you.
Okay, the question again was,
Yes, basically, what will your budget priorities be for the next biennium?
well, we talked about, a few minutes ago, I talked about the surplus and tax cuts. And one of the things that I know I've heard a lot of people want is the Social Security not to be taxed anymore. There's a lot of senior citizens that are on fixed incomes, and that was one thing that I would propose. I know that they've been talking about that already, but that was something I would support. Healthcare, said that again, healthcare costs, and I totally agree that mental health is a big issue. And it goes into crime and everything. I mean, mental health is a big issue for both those things. The surplus, like I said, most of it I would like to be refunded to the taxpayers, also as tax cuts. I don't know how much would need to be earmarked towards other projects, but the bonding bill is something that needs to be addressed also for those projects. And if there's any new projects that need to be added because of the timing has been longer than the projects that were already earmarked last time, there's probably going to be new projects that are going to be earmarked that need to be earmarked for also. So those are basically the same things when I talk about the top 3 issues I'm worried about is mostly to do with budget.
Thank you.
All right, Dar, we're going to stick with you, and we're going to talk bonding, because I don't think we've talked about it enough yet. So,
Yeah.
and it's an important issue. The past session, the legislature failed to pass a bonding bill to fund important capital projects throughout the state, including several critical local projects seeking funding, including right here at MSU. Do you support passing a bonding bill early in the 2023 session to fund these projects? Dar?
Yes, I do, because we all know what's happening with the cost of construction and everything is just going up dramatically. So I would absolutely support doing that right away.
Great, thank you. And Luke, to you.
To be very just direct, yes, I want to get it done as soon as possible. However, I will point out to previous forums that GMG has hosted, where I have been the only Democrat at the front of the room, and I've heard my Republican colleagues say that next year is going to be a budget year and not traditionally going to be a bonding year. And when they have been pressed on whether or not that they believe that there is going to be space for a bonding, they are non-committal, or will say that it's going to be, the focus is going to be on state agency budgets and not going to be focused on bonding. So I have said since the end of this last legislative session, let's get it done. Let's have a special session and let's get it done now. I've heard from Mankato city leaders, from North Mankato city leaders who talk about fiscal responsibility, which is something I hear the other side of the aisle talk about. However, the city leaders from both communities here say every day that we are waiting to get a bonding bill passed, our prices are going up. Don't give me that crap about being fiscally responsible and drag your feet on getting a bonding bill passed. So yes, we need to get one done. I think we need to have a special session, whether that's today, tomorrow, or immediately following the election before the regular legislative session begins in January, because they do have a point. Next legislative session in 2023 is going to be focused on state agency budgets, which is why I would love to have a special session between now and then to get it done. get it off the table, clear the table, or however, whatever analogy you want to use there. That way we don't have to worry about it when we're having discussions about the different budgets for the state agencies. So let's get it done, and let's get it done now.
Thank you, Luke.
All right, we're going to change topics now to economic development. In your view, what is the role of the legislature in supporting business vitality and economic development? What specific steps or programs would you support to grow business and jobs in Minnesota? And I believe, Dar, you get to go first on...
That goes to Luke.
Luke, yep. There we go. Thank you.
So I think when it comes to different policies that the state can implement, we need to look at ways that can both benefit employers but also benefit workers. We've heard from workers across the state this last 2 years about ways that we can support them. I had a really hard time listening some stories in committee where people were coming forward saying that they were put in positions because they don't have paid time off, that they could either, it was a mom that was testifying in the committee, and she said she had a choice that she had to make because she didn't have paid time off. She had a sick kid. She could either go to work, leave her child at home with no one to care for them, or do what every parent wants to do and take care of their kid when they're sick. But at doing so, she was scared about being able to afford putting food on the table and a roof over her head. And so in the House those last 2 years, we have focused on what we can do to support workers. And I think that when workers are paid wages that are living wages, when workers are able to take care of themselves, they are more productive, which then in turn fuels the economy. And so I think there's a lot of things like that that we can do that will have a direct impact on the workforce and strengthen our economy as a state.
Thank you.
Okay, so some of the things that I think we need to help with is, well, there needs to be better daycare options. I don't have kids, but when I was of that age, we wouldn't have been able to afford daycare, so I would have probably had my husband stay home because I'm the workaholic in the family. But how do we do that though? How do we make it so that it's more affordable? Do we allow, change some of the restrictions as far as how many kids they can have? Do we have bigger facilities? I don't know what that entails, but I definitely think there needs to be some work with the daycare options. I think as far as getting more people into the workforce in this area, I think a lot of it, we can work together with the GMG and you guys. I mean, Mankato has always done really good about marketing the area. And I think we need to show that this area is a great place to live. It's like living in the cities and living in the suburbs. You've got the best of both worlds. That's why I never moved back home. That's one of the things. We also need to make sure we have safer communities. I mean, if we need to show that we have a good, safe area to live in. We need to have affordable housing. How that entails, getting affordable housing. I've been selling real estate for 25 years, and this last 2 years has been crazy. So how to make affordable housing, that's a tricky subject. But yeah, those are some of the things that we need to do to get people to stay in the area. Starts with the MSU and all the schools around here. How do we keep them? I stuck around and then I left, and then I came back because I liked the area. So we just need people to know that this is a great area, and we need to market it as that. So.
Thank you. And I would note I'm wearing my purple tie as an MSU alum today as well. So, Dar, I want to stick with you. I want to talk about public safety, something you just brought up as well. So public safety continues to be a key issue. In recent years, public trust in law enforcement has become a more significant issue than ever before. What can you do from the legislature to help keep our community safe and increase public trust in law enforcement?
What can we do? I think a lot of it has to do with maybe not something we can do, but there needs to be stiffer penalties for some of these violent crimes. Catch and release, as I say, is just for fishing. I mean, there has been so many people that get arrested and then the next day they're out and then they commit another crime. We are not as bad as some areas in the country, so it's not as bad. But I'd like to see stiffer penalties. We have a drug problem. the open borders. I went to an event about a month ago. There was an event on fentanyl. I really didn't know anything about fentanyl. And I know that it kills over 300 people a day in the US, but there's been I think it was over 12 people in the Mankato area that have died from it. And they're people who are just, some of them are just, they have one person that spoke at that event was, I think, her son or grandson, that said that he just had a toothache. He got a pill from someone that he thought was like an Oxycontin, and he dies after one pill. So that scares the crap out of me, the stuff that's in our community. Now, Mankato, I believe, was the first place that had the rainbow fentanyl in the state of Minnesota. And, Halloween's coming up. We have to worry about that. There's so much fentanyl in this country that can kill all of us many times over. So those are some of the things that we need to have. Like I said, we need to have stiffer penalties. There needs to be lower the standard of how much fentanyl a person can have to be charged for a certain crime. Those are some of the things that we definitely need to do.
Thank you, Dar. Luke, to you.
So when it comes to trust in public safety, I think it needs to have a conversation about the way that we approach public safety. I'm proud to live in Mankato. I think Mankato's law enforcement and our approach to public safety is pretty darn good. They are a nationwide leader when it comes to the Yellow Line Project, and not to be confused with the Yellow Ribbon Project. The Yellow Line Project is saying that not all problems can be solved by simply throwing law enforcement at it. If there is a mental health crisis, we should be sending a mental health crisis team there. If someone's having an issue with a drug overdose, maybe an LADC should be going there. Having situational specific resources responding to our issues in the community can be some of the ways that we can better serve our community members, and Mankato's already starting to do that. I think that is a model for the rest of the state. Another thing that I think that we need to address is the majority of law enforcement officers we know are good people doing the best job that they can. However, there can be bad apples. And if anyone's familiar with the term the blue wall of silence, what that means is that if there is one person who is causing a problem, they might turn to their coworkers and say, hey, I'm gonna go do this, and it might be unethical, but if you tell anyone on me, I'm not gonna have your back the next time we're in a hairy situation, which is basically forcing their coworkers who might wanna do the best job that they can and putting them in a situation where they feel that their ethics might be compromised, but they also wanna be able to go home at the end of the day. And so putting systems in place like empowering the post board, which is our licensing body to law enforcement within the state. So for example, social workers in the state, if they get licensed and if they do something, they can have that license taken away. They can no longer practice as a social worker. The post board, which licenses our law enforcement officers, has no such authority. So if we can do that in education, we can do that in social work, why can't we do something like that with our law enforcement officers? Again, good law enforcement officers have nothing to worry about because they're doing a good job. They're holding to the ethics of the community of which they serve, but it puts a process in place where we don't have to worry about the good officers being put in a compromising situation. And so I think that we could take steps like that, and I think that in cooperation with other ideas like the Yellow Line Project will help restore trust in our law enforcement.
Thank you, Luke.
All right, we're going to switch gears now, no pun intended, to transportation. This is a long one. So Minnesota's transportation infrastructure faces funding challenges at all levels, including a significant shortfall in state highway funding over the next 20 years. This past session, efforts were made to dedicate 100% of the auto parts sales tax collections to transportation, effectively doubling the allocation from roughly $150 million to $300 million annually. Now, do you support dedicating 100% of auto parts sales tax to transportation, or what other funding solutions do you support? And Luke, you get to go first with this one.
I think this is a pretty easy one for me to answer. As I said, I serve on the Transportation Committee in the House. We heard this bill, and I voted in favor of this bill. I did that after several discussions, though, is that when you take what this bill does by dedicating these funds, it takes money out of the general fund and dedicates it towards our roads and bridges and that infrastructure. And I agree that our roads and bridges and our transportation infrastructure needs investment, right? That's no questions asked there. But when we do things like that, it takes money out of the general fund, so we have to be thoughtful about it. We have to say, what impact does this have on anything else that's getting funded from the general fund? And in years like we've had for the last couple of years where there's a surplus, we can do that safely and still fund where the rest of our priorities are. But in going forward, we just want to make sure that all of the other, whether it's state agency budgets, whether that's the DNR or our education system or human services, whatever it is, continues to make sure that they have the funding that they need when we're taking these funds and dedicating it towards roads and bridges.
Thank you.
I agree also that it should be used for transportation. So I don't, I know some people will probably bring up like increasing the gas tax, and that's something that I'm not in favor of. I would prefer that any money because this is not a big chunk of money that can be used. Any other money that needs to it would somehow be figured out in the budget. So instead of adding more to the budget.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dar. You guys are just clipping along. I like it. It's great. So I'm going to follow up on this transportation question. And part of that discussion was the allocation for roads and bridges or transit. Do you have a thought on what kind of allocation mix that should look like, and particularly here in Greater Minnesota? So Luke, we'll go to you first, then Dar.
So I think that when I talk with whether it's college students or people in the area, what I hear is that if there was some sort of transit between Mankato and the Twin Cities, they would take that. I think investments in that would be beneficial to all of us. And I think that we could do it if we had the political will to do it. I also think taking some of that money and investing in our electric vehicle charging infrastructure, because whether or not you like electric vehicles, that is the way that the state, the nation, the world is moving. And so we can say, hey, Minnesotans, as we know, it's a growing and growing number of electric vehicles on the road. Let's get ahead of it. Let's make that transition easier. I think every major car manufacturer has said by 2035, all of the vehicles that they release are going to be electric vehicles. And so that's not government mandates. That's not, anyone coming in. That's what the private industry is doing. That's what they're choosing to do. And if that's their choice, and if that's the choice of consumers, of Minnesotans, that they want electric vehicles, then I think it behooves us as responsible state leadership to say, hey, we hear you when you say this. We hear you when you want to make these choices. Let's support you in making those choices. And so whether it is transit options to go from Greater Minnesota to the metro, whether it's to Rochester to Mankato, that's another, I think, pathway that I've heard people talk about that could benefit us as a community. I think there's a lot of different ways that we could invest in our transit options and would be willing to partner with any organizations, whether it's city leadership or organizations like GMG to figure out what would be best for our community.
Thank you. Luke, thank you, Luke. Dar, discussion about transportation funding as it comes to transit funding, and any thoughts on that when it comes to buses, light rail, et cetera?
Well, light rail, we all know how well the one in the Twin Cities is going. So I am not in support of having a light rail from Mankato to Rochester or Mankato to the Twin Cities. We are, $500 million over budget right now for the one in the Twin Cities. There's not very many people using them. I know some areas in the country, they probably use them, but we don't use them around here as much. So I'm not in support of that. As far as electric vehicles, I drove a Prius for 12 years. So I am all in support of saving gas and doing something, but we are not right there for electric vehicles. It will come, maybe not in my lifetime, but to force these car dealers to have so many vehicles that are electric vehicles on their lots, and whether they sell them or not. Let the free market decide whether we're ready for electric vehicles or not. There's just not, it's just not something that I support. So, and as far as like making the electric vehicles, I mean, they're going overseas to other countries. They're using slave labor. Those are some things that I definitely don't support. We have a lot of nickel in northern Minnesota. So if we're going to mine and we're going to use electric vehicles, and why are we not mining up in upper northern Minnesota? As far as, helping to pay for some of this stuff, one of the things I do support is electric vehicles. They don't pay any gas taxes, so there should be some type of fee, or whether it's based on mileage or it's based on a yearly fee, there should be some fee that they pay. But yeah, I'd love to have an electric vehicle, but the grid isn't there. It's just not. If you really study electric vehicles, we're not quite there yet. Someday we will be, but it needs to happen gradually. But it can't happen in 10 years.
Thank you, Dar. We're going to touch on that a little bit later there too, so foreshadowing for the rest of you. So Dar, we're going to stick with you, and we're going to talk about talent and workforce. Employers are struggling more than ever to hire employees to fill some of the most essential positions. From your perspective, what are the key strategies for ensuring that Minnesota has an abundant and qualified workforce now and into the future? And what other workforce issues do you see need to be addressed given our current economy?
I think one of my last answers was kind of similar to when you talk about those issues. I think it goes back to daycare. Although when people are getting out of college and you're trying to recruit someone from college, obviously they probably don't need daycare. But again, affordable housing. Mankato. There's times when when I look at the prices and I look at the rent rates. I mean, it seems like we're pretty close to the Twin Cities sometimes. Not quite, but for the income, we're definitely high. So how do we make that better? I know some people have talked about there should be rent control. Well, yeah, maybe in theory, but when you think about it, what if you have a landlord that their taxes go up? Look at how much our taxes have gone up in the last couple of years, and all of a sudden you've controlled that rent for that landlord, and they cannot raise their rent. So that now you have landlords going out of business. You have them selling the houses, and now you have no places for people to rent. So it's a complex issue, but. Yeah, that's just a couple of things that I think need to happen.
Luke, to you.
I think that the daycare issue is one that's having a big impact on our region locally here. And I agree that we should look at how we can support daycare providers, whether it is looking at how we license, professionalizing the workforce maybe in some way, shape, or form to attract more people to want to do that work. What we have seen too through this pandemic is that people left the labor market and realized that they had more money in their pocket because they were staying home taking care of their kids. That the costs of daycare are so high and they weren't making enough that it didn't make sense to be a part of the workforce. And so whether it is subsidies to help with childcare or wages in general to make sure that workers are getting paid a fair wage, going back to my previous comments about paid time off and ways to support workers to be a whole person. I think there's a lot of things that we can do in that front. I know that in some of our agricultural industries that they're building townhomes and housing complexes, and just that's going to be, you want a job here, you get a free apartment just to try to attract workers. So I think there's a lot of innovation that's going on in the private sector, and so I think that opens up space for private public partnerships to be able to work together to try to tackle some of these issues.
Thank you.
You kind of led right into our next question about childcare, so I kind of want to follow up a little bit more about it. You're talking about the cost and the access for childcare. What would be some solutions to help address the cost? Because a lot of times businesses, providers, they say, maybe it's regulations that why they have to keep the costs up. What would be your solution to address some of those costs and some of those barriers to providing that childcare? And I guess we're starting with Luke on this one.
So as I said, I think that if we can look at the regulations, so I'm a parent. I've got a 7 and a 10-year-old. And when I was looking for childcare, they're both in school now, but when I was looking for childcare after they were born and wanting to get back into going to work, it was scary. Being able to trust someone with your children, the most important thing in your life, walk away and be all like, you question, am I making the right choice? How do I know this is the right person? And you want to know that you're making a choice that is safe and that is right, and that the people that you are leaving your kids with are going to do a good job, which is where the regulation piece comes in. We want to make sure people feel safe and comfortable doing that with their children. And so, as in with most rules that we have as a state, they're kind of reactions to situations that happened over the decades. But if there are ways to decrease the regulation or maybe make it more efficient, sure, I'm on board with that. But it's going to be balanced with a desire to make sure that we're not compromising safety of our children at the expense of, oh, we just want to make it easier to do this job. And so it is a line that we have to balance because both are important.
Thank you. And Dar?
Yeah, childcare. Like I said, I can't imagine parents. How do you work? So I look at some of my employees, and one has 2 kids, and I don't think she barely covers her wages, to work. Maybe she just wants to get away from them. But no, can we have larger organizations and where they can have more people, more kids in a daycare situation, and absolutely, there's no regulations that I would want to reduce the safety of having kids in a place. But how do you balance that so that you can have more kids that can maybe reduce the cost? I know a lot of women, especially when I was, I think a lot of people do now when they have kids, they open up a daycare because they figure that's cheaper than them going to work. So that's what a lot of women were doing. But maybe we need to just have larger organizations that can have more kids, and then economies of scale, maybe it can reduce the price. So, but that's always been, how many years have we been talking about daycare and the cost of daycare? It's been as long as for 30, 40 years at least. My mom, didn't have daycare, but for many, many years, ever since we all started wanting to work, and it's been a problem since then. So I don't know how to, obviously they haven't solved it then, so I don't know how we're going to solve it, but we have to try.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Dar, we're going to stick with you. We're going to talk about agriculture. Recognizing that in many rural communities, agriculture represents the largest economic sector and source of employment. Greater Mankato Growth, Inc. includes Green Seam, an initiative with a mission to position our region as the go-to location for talent, business, innovation, and education related to agriculture. How will you work to promote our state's ag economy to ensure the economic vitality of Greater Minnesota?
Okay, well, some of you grew up in a farm, and I did not. So, but I know that some of the issues that farmers are having is that the small business owner, just like a lot of businesses, is that they're getting swallowed up by the big corporations. So how do we sustain that? How do we, I know that there's a lot of people that want to keep these small businesses going, but how do they? So we have to support them. I know one of the big things that people, when they if they want to have their son or daughter take over the business, or if they pass away, the taxes, are ridiculous for the state taxes. So, but no, as far as keeping our agriculture moving, we have to make sure we have housing. We have to make sure we have lots of things for the egg. One of the things that I lost my train of thought, but no, like you said, being able to pass it along to your family without having taxes, having a lot of taxes. But it's hard because it's just like in real estate. You're trying to get there's big corporations that are trying to swallow you up, and we like being small. I mean, we like to support the small business in this community. That's one thing that we've always done. The small businesses have a really good success rate in this community because we all support them. But that's just not something that. Yeah, and one thing I'd like to see a little bit more earmarked towards is organic farming. I'd like to have some type of program that helps that also.
Thank you. Luke?
So as part of running for office and campaigning, one of the things that we do is try to seek endorsements from different groups. I want to take this as an opportunity to point out that some of the two largest voices for the agricultural community up at the state level is both the Farm Bureau and the Farmers Union. The Farm Bureau, some people can say is more conservative leaning. Some people say Farmers Union is more progressive leaning. I can say that both have endorsed me in this race. I don't know if Ashley remembers, but 2 years ago when I was first running and she was grilling me on the questions, this was the one area that I probably knew some of the least about, and I had to own that in the moment. So the last 2 years, I have spent as much time as I can to educate myself and work with our agricultural community to be advocates for them. And where that took me is carrying the legislation, the E15 legislation. If you go to a gas pump at Quick Trip here in town, you'll see that there's a little sticker that says up to 15% ethanol. What I was approached with by the agricultural community was that they wanted to make that the standard statewide. So I listened to my community. I listened to those that are doing the work. I had tons of farmers come to me saying, hey, we appreciate the work that you're doing on this. I also point out that it was a priority of the governor. It was a priority of President Biden to put these investments in biofuels. It also had a benefit of it would be cleaner burning. And so there's an educational benefit too, or environmental, benefit to increasing our ethanol levels in our fuel. And so that I was working in partnership with them, and I signed on to bills for drought relief and any other thing I could do to help support our ag economy. When I have been campaigning, when I went to Farm Fest, talking to farmers there, some of the biggest things that I've heard from them is healthcare as one of the largest challenges that they have. And surprisingly enough, they are in support, at least the majority of the farmers that I talk to are in support of having a public option when it comes to healthcare. And that is because their costs are out of pocket and they are just sky high, and to have a public option in in healthcare would be immensely supportive to them. So I've been a partner to our ag economy. I've had more conversations with Green Team since I first ran 2 years ago than I can count, and I would continue to be a partner to our agricultural community.
Thank you. We're going to go back to energy now. So Minnesotans rely on affordable and consistent energy to power their daily lives. Businesses and market forces are driving changes in the energy industry. Governor Walz recently released his Climate Action Plan. The plan aims to reduce greenhouse gases by 50% by 2030. Please share your thoughts on how you will approach the topic of energy and sustainability at the legislature. What will be your priorities? And Luke, we start with you.
So I think it's not even just a priority of Governor Walz. I think that the nationwide, what we're hearing from our power producers are that they are all trying to see what they can do to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions in the goal of being carbon neutral. And I think that right now, as what we're seeing is the more that we can invest in renewable energy, solar panels, windmill, whatever it happens to be, I think that's going to benefit us long term, because then we're not dependent on anywhere else for our electric generation. The other thing that needs to go hand in hand with that is looking at our whole electric grid. As more individual people are choosing to produce their own energy with rooftop solar, our grid needs to be able to also be updated to manage and take that. And so that way it's not just power can only go one direction. Our grid needs to be smart. And so it's a multi-step approach to make sure that we're producing the energy that we need, but then our grid is able to adapt on the fly to wherever our energy needs are. So I think that all steps towards that, and whether that's universities like this and making sure that every building that can has solar panels on it. I mean, I think that would cut operating costs for universities or any public space, which then in turn would save taxpayers money. So there's even an economic incentive to making some of these investments over the long term.
Thank you. And Dar?
Well, I agree that solar and wind are good options. However, we live in Minnesota, so I'm a little worried. I mean, we've got darkness quite a bit. We have cold. So I would like to see something, nuclear energy explored more. I don't know how that would look, but I'd like to see a combination of all of those. The one thing that does concern me about solar and wind is when you need to replace them, guess where they go? They just get buried. So we can't recycle those products. So that's a concern too. So you're trying to save the economy or the environment, yet you're adding one more problem to it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dar. Right, we're going to stick with you, Dar, and we're going to talk about the Minnesota way, and that's getting along, right? All right, so divisive politics. Before we get to questions from the audience, I do want to touch on something that it consistently comes up, and that's divisiveness. Everyone claims the current level of divisiveness and partisanship at the legislature seems to be getting worse and worse, not just along party lines, but there appears to be an ever-increasing tension between the Twin Cities metro and greater Minnesota. How do you view the state's current political climate, and how would you work to build consensus in order to get work done? Dar?
Well, not only the state is divided. My household was for a while. My husband, 66 years old, just recently 2 years ago, became a Republican. So I had those issues in my own house, and I know how it is. So, but I will have to say that part of it starts with the division between the rural areas and the urban areas, or the Twin Cities. It starts kind of with our governor. How many times have we been called rocks and cows? I mean, that doesn't help when that comes from him, especially since he's from here. So I also see it too in real estate. Because we're from Mankato, if I have a transaction with an agent up there, I'm not saying all of them, I'm just saying every once in a while they kind of act like I'm just don't know what I'm doing, even though I've been doing this for 25 years. So it's, what do we do in the House and the Senate, at the Capitol? I don't know, but I'll tell you one thing is when I'm door knocking, I said people look at me and first off they tell me they think I'm crazy for doing what I'm doing, but they ask me, what are you gonna do? And are you gonna get anything done? And I don't know how to answer that because I've never been there, but I do know that I've been involved in over 1,000 real estate transactions, and believe me, they have not all been easy. Lately, the last 2 years, if you're a seller, it's a piece of cake. You just take 10 offers and you tell the seller, take this one. But in negotiating, you have to know how to work with both sides. I've always prided myself in being a problem solver, thinking outside the box, and that's what I hope to bring those types of skills to the Capitol.
Thank you, Dar. Luke, to you.
The last 2 years, my first term in office was unique because we were also under a global health pandemic. Trying to learn a new job when everything's, as they said several times, never been done this way before, posed a unique challenge in getting legislation passed, in building relationships and building those bridges. But I can say, after 2 years, some of the biggest pieces of legislation that I personally worked on, I had both Republicans and Democrats standing shoulder to shoulder with me to get it in support of it. I had Republicans on the House floor testifying in support of my bill, encouraging their colleagues to also support my bill. And a lot of it just has to do with being willing to sit down and have a conversation. Going out door knocking, if anyone has ever done it, you never quite know how it's gonna go when you come up and knock on a door. And sometimes you find someone who is, aligned with you, and it's quick and it's easy and it's fun. Sometimes you find people that are not aligned with you, that challenge you, and that also can be fun, because if they're willing to engage in conversation, you can say, hey, I'm going to listen to you, I'm going to hear you, I'm going to do the best job I can to represent you should I be elected. And it can inform my opinion on different areas. What I have noticed is the number of times too where people will, ask, well, are you a Republican or Democrat? That'll be the first thing. I'll barely be able to say, hi, my name is Luke. And they're like, Republican or Democrat? And I'm like, well, I believe in bipartisanship. I've worked together, and they'll just repeat themselves asking about, am I Republican or Democrat? And then if I say, well, I'm the DFL endorsed candidate, but I work across I can't even get it out of my mouth before sometimes there's a door slammed in my face. And it doesn't happen often, but I think what we need to see is people willing to talk, and people willing to look past that. Maybe we have differences on a specific issue, but sometimes that end goal of what we want, we both want to get there. We might just have a different way of getting there. I think what's harmful and what we're seeing is that I had a colleague elected in the House this last term for the first time. And he ran as a Republican, but he didn't believe in working across the aisle. He didn't believe even really working with his own caucus. That in the Minnesota House, there's the different caucuses. You have Democrats, you have Republicans, you have a third caucus of New Republicans. And this individual was elected as a Republican, got kicked out of the Republican caucus because he didn't want to work with anybody. And he joined the New Republicans and got kicked out of the New Republican caucus. And so what we're seeing is some of that extremism on the other side of the aisle. And I think that is what is harmful. And so we need to be able to recognize us all as people, to be able to communicate with each other, because I think we have more in common with each other than what divides us. And we just need to be willing to see that in each other.
Thank you, Luke. All right, so we're going to take a question from the audience here, and I could guess who this is from, but I'm going to read it. We are at Minnesota State University Mankato, after all. State statute 135A.01 states that the state legislature will fund 67% of a public higher education. Will you work to meet this commitment? So that's Luke, to you. Funding 2/3 of public higher education.
Yes. What I think is money should not be a barrier to anyone who wants to get to further their education. We all benefit from people who choose to participate in the education system, whether that is at a four-year university or at a tech school, to be able to have those opportunities. What happens? Well, when they graduate, they become part of the labor force across the state in whatever area that they choose to partake in. And so it benefits us all. And whether it is a vocational job or whether it is a business degree or maybe even more arts and cultural or music or what have you, we still benefit from that. And so I think ensuring that it's something as simple as funding and tuition as being a barrier is not something that should be there, that we should make sure that we're investing in our education system.
Dart, to you.
Well, if it's law, I'm a rule follower usually, so yes, I would abide by that. But yes, all the different education systems, the programs that we have in Mankato area are great programs. So whether you go to any of the private ones or the public ones, South Central College, any of them are good programs, and they need to be funded. So what I'm not for is for what the president has allowed to get rid of people's student loan. That's something I'm not, because you chose to go to college, you chose to go in, there's other ways you could have done things. So that's a debt that you took on, and I feel that the person should take that debt. But as far as funding the schools, absolutely.
Great, thank you. And Dar, we're going to stick with you. Another interesting question, I think, given being here at MSU and then given your background as well. What will you do to protect renters from predatory landlords in Minnesota? So protecting renters and renters' rights. So Dar, to you.
From predatory
Landlords.
landlords. Well, that's a tough question because when you say predatory landlords, I mean, most of them are just trying to make a living. Yes, they're trying to, they all say as a realtor, you should be buying a property every year. And I've chosen not to do that. But yes, there is some landlords there that do take advantage of the people. So how do we get more people in that want to be a landlord? That's pretty tough because I've shown houses in this town and there is many houses that I would never want to be a landlord because of how they're treated. So yeah, that's a tough question because there is, just like any occupation or any business, there's bad landlords and there's great landlords. I've seen some people who keep their places awesome and they always keep them up, but there's also people who don't take care of them and they don't care if there's mold growing in the houses or there's leaky faucets that are going to turn into mold. So yes, how do you take care of those? I mean, I would hope that someone would call the city and complain, and because they do have rules in Mankato that they have to be inspected every so often.
Thank you. Luke, to you.
When it comes to tenant rights and to make sure that people aren't exploited, I think one of the most important things is to make sure people are aware of what their rights are. When I went to school, I just had to explore of what this was like. I had a situation where I was going to move into a house with some friends because that made the most economic sense to us because we were all poor as dirt. And what happened was he was renovating a house and it was like, okay, and he said it'll be done, but it was all said and done, or by the time we moved in. Well, the day came to move in and there were holes in the floor, there was disconnected plumbing, and this individual still expected us to move in and pay rent. And I thought he was joking at first. And so I had to dive into what tenants have rights? I didn't even know that was a thing either. And so I had to look into it. And I think putting in processes that people are aware that they have rights, talking with students here at the university, one of the things that they were actually leading on, and I thought this was phenomenal, was actually building a website where they could rate landlords. And so it would be a public space where anyone who was looking to be a prospective tenant somewhere could say, hey, how are they? And it would give people a tool to become more informed about where they're looking to live. And I thought that was something that, again, was student-led, that I hope that they're successful with, because I think that could be a really good resource to help protect them against what could be a predatory situation, even though I hope that that doesn't happen.
Great. Thanks, Luke. We'll get back to Ashley now.
All right, we want to talk a little bit more about healthcare because both of you have talked about that as one of your main priorities. And of course, we know that the healthcare costs continue to increase for both employers and consumers. Minnesota is near the top of the list nationally when it comes to the number of treatments and procedures that insurance policies sold in the state must include. What can be done to reduce healthcare costs and still maintain access to rural hospitals and to clinics? And I think Luke is first?
Yep.
All right.
So currently there is a moratorium on new beds throughout the state. And the reason for that, as I just tried to figure out during my first term, was there was a fear that large healthcare corporations could become so large that the smaller community healthcare facilities wouldn't be able to stay in place and serve their communities. And so what the state at the time, this is way before I was in the legislature, tried to do. They wanted to avoid a situation where someone from greater Minnesota would just have to drive up to the metro to receive some sort of basic health care. And so I think that continues to be a guiding force. We want to make sure that people can receive health care in the communities of which they live. We know that there's not an option in every community across the state, but hopefully as many as we can keep. But when it comes to costs, one of the things that you hear when it comes to healthcare costs is like a single payer healthcare system. I don't think as a state we're going to be able to implement anything like that in a light switch. But what I do think as a path to more affordable healthcare would be a public option. And that would just be something where a private industry administers a healthcare plan just like Blue Cross and Blue Shield, but it's also financially backed by the state. And so as I said previously, when I talk to our farmers, to our agricultural community, having something like that public option is something that they're advocating for because it would keep their costs low. In the Minnesota House, this last year, there was legislation introduced that did not establish a public option. But what it looked to do was simply say, we want to fund a study on what a public option would look like in Minnesota. So it's not even like dipping your toe in the water. It's like taking a step towards the water, but you're not quite there yet. And even a study on what a public option would look like was too much for my colleagues on the other side of the political aisle. And so we in the House DFL, we're looking at ways of, we want to explore any option we can to help control healthcare costs, but even something as mundane as a study, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle wouldn't support, and they all voted against it. And in end of session negotiations, we couldn't even get that. So I think that is something that we could do that would help countless Minnesotans, and I would be committed to trying to get something like a public option established in the state.
Thank you. And Dar.
Okay, a couple months ago, I was talking with a senator, and they were talking about something that they wanted to, maybe they already did try to introduce it at the Capitol, where, transparency in prices. What does it cost if you want to have a colonoscopy or if you need a knee replacement? So is there something that where maybe, the doctors have to post all those prices and you can shop around just like you do for groceries or anything? And maybe there's where maybe portion of that would be if you save the insurance company money, that maybe you get portion of that back. That was something that I thought was intriguing enough to maybe explore. The cost of drugs is ridiculous. When I go into someone's house and of course I'm looking through I'm not looking through their cupboards, but I'm opening up their closets and whatnot to see their spaces. And I see someone that's got 20 prescription bottles. I know what it costs. My husband is on Medicare, and we actually get some of our drugs from Canada. He's getting Advair. When you get in that donut hole, you pay so much money for your drugs. So why is it so much less to get drugs in a different country than it is in the US? That makes me furious. So that is something I would like to see happen, that we can shop around for drugs more and we're not penalized because we have to do that out of our pocket. Why? I understand it's all part of insurance, but this is a wish list for me. I'd like to see more healthcare, more options for holistic treatments covered, because there's a lot of treatments, a lot of things that can be done holistically, and a lot of people don't want to do those treatments because it's not covered by insurance, where I think they would probably save money if they would be able to do more holistic treatments. One thing I'd like to have happen also is I am sick and tired of seeing drugs being advertised on TV. It's why do they have to advertise them on TV? It glorifies them. So that's something that I would like to see. But the healthcare costs absolutely need to be reduced. Something to do, like we talked about insurance before, health insurance, allowing an option for people that are farmers, the independent contractors, which includes a lot of people, and the small business owners. Affordable Care Act was not affordable for most small business owners, and I know a lot of people disagree with that, but I know so many people who were zapped with when they have 3-4 kids, their premiums were ridiculous, and they didn't want to go to the doctor because it was bad enough paying their premiums. So something needs to be done.
Thank you, Dar. All right, Dar, we're going to stick with you, and we're going to get into this conversation about electric vehicles again and talk about what the state has been doing around that. So in 2021, the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency and Governor Walz adopted a rule known as Minnesota Clean Cars. This new rule requires that Minnesota follow vehicle emission standards that are set forth by the California Air Resources Board. Most concerning about this rule is that the Minnesota Clean Car Standard requires Minnesota to follow rules set forth by an unelected board in California. Do you support the Minnesota Clean Car Standard? And in your view, is the push for electric vehicles a threat to Minnesota's agricultural economy and traditions? Dar.
Well, I think I said before that I do not support that. I just think we're not there yet. Someday, yes, we will. And if are they gonna make tractors be run by electric engines? I just don't think we're there yet. So I do not support it, and I don't support the fact that it was not the legislative system did not approve that it was another body that did.
Thank you, Dar. Luke, to you.
So I'm going to reframe this a little bit. There is 2 options when it comes to some of our vehicle emissions. We can follow the federal guidelines, or we can, as a state, decide to challenge ourselves saying we want to do better. And by doing better, we chose to pick a more stringent set of guidelines to follow. And while there were a lot of things that did not get accomplished this last legislative session because of obstructionism, I think that was another example where the governor did what he could to benefit the state, because he saw that at times the legislative body was not as progressive or as getting as much done as we could have. And it had to do with I remember at the end of the session when we were trying to pass some bonding bills, that my Republican colleagues stood up for hours talking about their favorite 1980s TV show for hours. And whether it was that, I had another Republican colleague that started talking about the Civil War and how he's a history teacher for a while we were trying to talk about a clean energy bill. And so some of that obstructionism prevented us from being able to get the work done that Minnesotans sent us to the Capitol to get done. And so this was a space where the governor did the best that he could, and he said, as a state, we can do better than just the federal level, and we are going to adopt rules that make it that say just that we can do better. At no point in time are we prohibited from changing that. We can change the rules that we set for that. We don't have to adopt every single thing that another state puts in place if we don't want to. And that was a choice that we can make at a future date. But I think that electric vehicles are not a threat to our state's economy. Again, in some of the conversations that I'm having with our local farmers, they're taking drones out to their fields to spray their fields. And I thought I didn't know that they were doing that until, again, it was a conversation with Green Seam. And so I don't know what the future is going to look like in regards to farming, and maybe there will be tractors that are all electric. Who knows? Maybe the battery technology will come around and that will be the thing of the future. I don't know. But I don't think that that's somehow a threat. I think that investing in the direction that the private market is choosing to go and being a partner in that is something that would be responsible for us to do as a state.
Thank you so much. I wish we had more time because this is really riveting and really interesting to hear from both of you. But we do want to, as we close, we want to give each of you a chance to make your case to the voters by answering one simple question. Why should voters vote for you? And Luke, we start with you.
So I think I want to encourage people to vote for me for more than just my track record of the last 2 years. I have been a person my whole life that has been committed to service. I've been committed to looking at the people around me and say, hey, how can we work together to get things done? And again, whether that is, looking at my time in AmeriCorps or my time in a labor union, I've been an advocate for workers, for the people in the community. I have spoken up in my capacity as a legislator that when we make investments of the state, we don't need to make investments to the wealthiest among us. In that we shouldn't be giving state taxpayer dollars to the wealthiest of corporations within the state. We need to make sure that our policies are directed at the average Minnesotan. We need to make sure our economic policies, our kitchen table issues that will do the most good to the most Minnesotans. And that is at the heart of what I'm committed to doing. I think that there is such great potential in our system of government. It is something I believe in, from how we can debate a bill at the legislature, and at the end of the day, it might look different than when we started, but hopefully it's better because of that debate. I believe that. I believe that voting is a right that we all have. I believe that voting, and the more that people partake in the system that we have of voting, the better off we all are. Those are my values, and those are what I believe are the values of our community. And so I think I would do the best job of representing the values of our community up at the state capitol, and so that's why I ask everyone for your support. Thank you.
Okay, why you should vote for me? Well, I have no political experience, so I have no track record, which is hopefully good because I can't say anything bad about me, right? If you like how things have been going in Minnesota for the last couple of years, then you probably shouldn't vote for me. But I plan on trying to make some changes. I feel there's a lot that needs to be done. We're all proud of the state, and we all want it to be the best state that we can live in. As a newbie, I'm the type of person that when I don't know something, I will find out the answers. Every business I've ever ran or worked for, I have always strived to do the best and be the best and run it with integrity. That's how I've ran my real estate business. I'm a Rotarian. We have guidelines as a Rotarian, and that is how I've ran my life. I will promise that I will do my best, and I will listen to everyone. I want to learn more about this community. I mean, it's just crazy how many things there are in this community that I never knew existed just by running for office. So regardless of, like I said, my political experience, I have the drive to do it. I'm very driven, goal-driven, and results-driven. I don't like politics the way they are right now, and I'd like to change that.
Great, thank you. Thank you to Darv Osberg and Luke Frederick for the discussion this evening. We appreciate your willingness to engage with voters this evening and talk about why they should elect you to serve our region in the Minnesota House. Please join me in thanking them. I also want to take a point of personal privilege and acknowledge two former representatives who are now retired, Jack Considine and Kathy Reiner. Thank you for being here. Jack snuck in there. So I want to thank Ashley Hanley, KTOE, and Radio Mankato for your partnership this evening. And thanks to all of you for attending tonight. As a reminder, Greater Mankato Growth has 3 more candidate forums. Each of these forums are recorded by our friends at KTV and Bethany Lutheran College and will be available online. Thank you, good night, and don't forget to vote.